Does someone like you even know what due process means? Judge Roy Mansfield said those words with a laugh, looking down at the black woman in the faded sweatshirt standing before his bench. The courtroom chuckled. The bailiff smirked. The prosecutor rolled his eyes. Nobody knew they were watching execution. Sandra Lopez had walked into that courtroom looking like she'd never seen the inside of a law library. Messy hair. Cheap clothes. Speaking in broken sentences. Playing the role of a scared, uneducated woman who couldn't afford a lawyer for a simple traffic violation. But Sandra wasn't scared. Sandra was hunting. She was a Harvard-educated attorney with a genius-level IQ, and she had just spent 6 months deliberately getting into Judge Mansfield's courtroom. She knew exactly what he would do, because he'd done it to hundreds of people who looked like her. Mock them. Humiliate them. Trap them into contempt charges that would put them in jail for weeks over minor infractions. But this time, he picked the wrong target. As the judge ordered her arrested for disrespecting the court, Sandra reached into her bag and pulled out a single document. The room went silent. The judge's face went pale. Because what Sandra just placed on the defense table wasn't a handwritten note or a Google printout. It was a federal injunction with his name on it, and a bar association card that proved she'd been recording every illegal word that came out of his mouth. The judge who thought he was untouchable just realized he'd been systematically confessing to civil rights violations for the past 20 minutes. And the woman he thought was helpless? She was about to end his entire career in less time than it takes to say, judicial misconduct. Stay with me, because what happens when this corrupt judge realizes he's been legally demolished by a genius in disguise is the most perfect case of karma the American justice system has ever seen. But to understand why Sandra Lopez walked into that courtroom willing to risk everything, her career, her reputation, even her freedom, you need to know where this story really begins. 6 months earlier, Sandra was sitting in her corner office in Manhattan, reading a news article that made her blood run cold. The headline read, "Rural Georgia Judge Sentenced Single Mother to 90 Days for Expired Tags." The woman in the photo looked familiar. Too familiar. It was her cousin Maria, and Judge Roy Mansfield had just destroyed her life over a $20 infraction. That's when Sandra made a decision that would change everything. She was going home. Not as a lawyer. Not as a Harvard graduate. But as bait. Because Sandra Lopez didn't just want to beat Judge Mansfield in court. She wanted to expose the entire corrupt system he represented. And she was willing to become the victim to do it. What happened next is a story of patience, precision, and the most brilliant legal trap ever set in American history. Sandra's rental car slowed as she passed the faded "Welcome to Millbrook, Georgia" sign, its paint peeling like everything else in this town. 15 years since she'd left for Harvard, and somehow the place looked smaller, sadder, more defeated than she remembered. She drove past the elementary school where she'd won her first debate competition, past the diner where her mother had worked double shifts to pay for SAT prep books, past the courthouse that loomed over Main Street like a monument to broken promises. That building was why she was here. The parking lot of the Sunset Motel was nearly empty when she checked in under a fake name. Room 12 smelled like cigarettes and regret, but it had a clear view of the street and enough distance from Manhattan that nobody would recognize her. Sandra dropped her designer bags on the sagging bed and pulled out a thick manila folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, court records, and photographs. Dozens of faces stared back at her. People who looked like her, people who'd stood before Judge Roy Mansfield and had their lives destroyed over parking tickets, expired tags, missed court dates for infractions that should have been $50 fines. Instead, Mansfield had turned them into criminals. 30 days. 60 days. 90 days in county jail. Lost jobs. Lost custody. Lost hope. Her cousin Maria's photo sat on top. 90 days for expired vehicle registration. She'd lost her job at the nursing home, then lost her apartment, then lost her kids to foster care. All because she couldn't afford the compounding fines and court fees Mansfield kept adding like he was running up a tab. Sandra's phone buzzed. A text from her senior partner. Still time to back out. Send local counsel instead. She deleted it. That evening, Sandra walked Main Street, listening. The beauty salon. The corner store. The barbecue joint where old men played dominoes. Everywhere she went, she heard the same stories. Mansfield was a predator in black robes, and everyone knew it. But who could fight back? Public defenders were overworked and underfunded. Private attorneys cost more than most families made in a year. And filing complaints against a judge in his own county? That was career suicide for any local lawyer. No one was coming to save these people. The system was designed to protect men like Mansfield. So Sandra would have to break it from the inside. Back in her motel room, she pulled out a second bag, this one from Goodwill. Faded sweatshirt. Worn sneakers. Cheap jeans. She laid out the costume carefully, then studied herself in the mirror. Tomorrow she'd need to become someone else entirely. Someone Mansfield would underestimate. Someone he'd mock and dismiss and try to destroy. Someone he'd never see coming until it was too late. She pulled up the county traffic court docket on her laptop and smiled. Getting arrested in Millbrook was going to be easier than she thought. Sandra spent 3 days studying Millbrook's traffic patterns before she found the perfect trap. Officer Derek Chun worked the morning shift on Route 9, and according to county records, he wrote an average of 47 tickets per month. Triple the department average. He was either the most vigilant cop in Georgia or the most ambitious. Either way, he was exactly what she needed. She disconnected her rear license plate light at 6:47 a.m., right before the morning commute. By 7:15, she was driving 12 miles under the speed limit on Route 9, waiting. The sun hadn't fully risen when she saw the cruiser pull out behind her. The blue lights came on 3 minutes later. Sandra pulled over, hands visible on the steering wheel, playing her role perfectly. Officer Chen approached with the cautious swagger of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He was young, maybe 26, with a kind of clean-cut appearance that suggested he still believed in the system. License and registration, ma'am. She handed them over with slightly trembling fingers. Not too much, just enough to seem nervous. He studied her driver's license, his flashlight lingering on her face. You're a long way from New York, Ms. Lopez. Visiting family, she said, adding a slight drawl she'd spent years erasing from her voice. Is something wrong, officer? He walked to the back of her car and pointed at the darkened license plate light. Equipment violation. This needs to be fixed within 72 hours, or you'll face additional fines. Perfect. I can't afford no ticket right now, Sandra said, letting her grammar slip. I just lost my job, and I'm staying with my cousin while I look for work. Chen's expression softened slightly. For a moment, she thought he might let her go with a warning. But then he glanced back at his cruiser, where a dashboard camera was recording everything, and his jaw tightened. I'm required to issue a citation. But it's a fix-it ticket. Just get it repaired and show proof to the court. The fine is minimal if you comply. He had no idea he was writing her a golden ticket to Judge Mansfield's courtroom. Sandra took the citation with shaking hands and read it carefully. Court date. 2 weeks from today. Presiding Judge, Roy T. Mansfield. She felt a dark satisfaction bloom in her chest. What happens if I can't fix it in time? She asked. Then you'll need to appear in court and explain why to the judge. But I'd advise getting it fixed, ma'am. Judge Mansfield isn't known for his patience. Sandra nodded meekly, thanking him for his kindness. As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror at the still broken light. She had no intention of fixing anything. In exactly 14 days, she'd walk into Roy Mansfield's courtroom looking like every other defendant he'd destroyed. And this time, he'd finally pick on someone who knew how to fight back. The trap was set. The Millbrook County Courthouse smelled like floor wax and desperation. Sandra sat in the back row of the gallery, dressed in her Goodwill costume. Faded hoodie, scuffed sneakers, hair pulled back in a messy bun. Around her, 24 other defendants waited with the hollow-eyed exhaustion of people who knew the system wasn't built for them to win. Judge Roy Mansfield entered at exactly 9 o'clock, his black robes flowing behind him like a cape. He was older than his photo suggested, mid-60s with silver hair and the kind of face that had probably been handsome once but had curdled into something cruel. He settled into his elevated bench with the self-satisfaction of a king claiming his throne. The first 3 cases took less than 10 minutes total. A man who couldn't afford his traffic fine got 30 days. A woman who showed up late got 60 days for contempt. A teenager who asked a question got screamed at until he apologized. Mansfield wasn't dispensing justice. He was performing dominance. Sandra Lopez, the bailiff called. She shuffled forward, keeping her shoulders slightly hunched, her gaze down. Everything about her body language screamed defeated before the fight even started. Mansfield glanced at the docket, then looked up at her with barely concealed disgust. "Ms. Lopez, you failed to repair a broken license plate light. How do you plead?" "Your Honor, I can explain." "I asked how you plead. Guilty or not guilty. Those are your only options, and I'd suggest you figure out which one applies before you waste any more of this court's valuable time." Sandra hesitated, playing confused. "I thought I could tell you why I couldn't fix it." "Did you fix it or not?" "No, but..." "Then you're guilty." Mansfield leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Let me guess. You thought you could just waltz in here wearing that street outfit and give me some sob story about being broke? You think I haven't heard it all before?" The courtroom went quiet. Sandra felt everyone watching, waiting to see if she'd fight back or fold. She chose option 3, she played dumb. "I don't understand all the legal words, Your Honor. I just need more time." "More time?" Mansfield's voice dripped with mockery. "You had 2 weeks. What were you doing getting your nails done?" "Oh wait." He made a show of looking at her hands. "Doesn't look like you can afford that either." Scattered laughter from the gallery. The prosecutor smirked. "The maximum penalty for this violation is 90 days in county jail," Mansfield continued, settling back in his chair like he was enjoying this. "And given your complete lack of respect for this court's time and your apparent inability to comprehend basic instructions, I'm inclined to impose the maximum. Unless you can give me one good reason why someone like you deserves any mercy whatsoever." Sandra looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes, and smiled inside. He'd just given her exactly what she needed. Sandra let her voice crack slightly, just enough to sound desperate. "Your Honor, I'm real sorry. I didn't know I could go to jail for this. Don't I get what's it called, a public defender or something?" Mansfield waved his hand dismissively. "Public defenders are for serious crimes. This is traffic court. You represent yourself or you plead guilty and accept your sentence. Those are your options." Sandra blinked, feigning confusion. "But I thought the Constitution said something about having a lawyer if you could go to jail." "Did you go to law school, Ms. Lopez?" Mansfield's tone was venomous. "No." "Then I suggest you stop trying to quote things you don't understand. The 6th Amendment applies to criminal proceedings, and this is a civil infraction." He was wrong. Dead wrong. And now it was on the record. Sandra pressed forward, her voice still meek. "So, I can't have a lawyer even though you just said I might go to jail for 90 days. That's correct. This court has determined that. But Your Honor, Sandra interrupted, stumbling over her words deliberately, I read online that if the punishment is more than 6 months, I have a right to. You read online? Mansfield cut her off with a harsh laugh. Let me give you some free legal advice, Ms. Lopez. Whatever website you were looking at between welfare checks is not a reliable source of law. I am. And I'm telling you that in my courtroom, you don't get a lawyer for a broken taillight. The court reporter's fingers flew across her stenograph machine, capturing every word. Sandra shifted her weight, playing nervous. Okay, but can I at least see the evidence against me? The officer's report or the pictures he took? The citation is your evidence. You were cited for a violation. That's all you need to know. But don't I have a right to confront my accuser? The officer who wrote the ticket isn't even here. Ms. Lopez, I'm going to stop you right there before you embarrass yourself further. Mansfield's face was reddening now. Your so-called rights don't include wasting this court's time with frivolous motions and amateur legal theories you picked up from Google. Officer Chen submitted his report. That's sufficient. Sandra glanced at the empty prosecutor's table. Can I at least see that report? I never got a copy. Denied. You're not entitled to discovery in a simple traffic matter. Another violation. Another nail in his coffin. Your Honor, I'm just trying to understand. No, you're trying to be clever. And let me tell you something. Mansfield leaned forward, his voice dropping to something darker. I've been on this bench for 30 years. I know exactly what people like you are trying to do when you come in here talking about rights and procedures. You think you can outsmart the system with your little Google searches and your attitude. Sandra's heart raced. He was giving her everything she needed. I'm sorry, Your Honor. I just don't want to go to jail when I didn't do anything wrong. Well, you should have thought about that before you decided to disrespect this court. Perfect. Mansfield's knuckles whitened as he gripped his gavel. Ms. Lopez, I'm going to ask you one more time. Do you have anything to say before I pass sentence? Or are you going to continue wasting this court's time with your pseudo-legal nonsense? Sandra took a small step forward, her voice still trembling but with just a hint of something beneath it. Something that made Mansfield's jaw tighten. Your Honor, I'm just trying to make sure I understand my rights. Isn't that what the court is supposed to help me with? Help you? Mansfield's voice rose sharply. I'm not here to hold your hand through basic legal concepts that any functioning adult should understand. This isn't a classroom, and I'm not your teacher. But Your Honor, stop talking. The gavel came down hard enough to echo through the courtroom. Several people in the gallery flinched. You will address this court with respect, or you will be held in contempt. Do you understand me? Sandra let her eyes widen, playing terrified. I'm sorry, I didn't mean. You didn't mean to what? Come into my courtroom dressed like you just rolled out of bed? You didn't mean to challenge my authority at every turn? You didn't mean to demonstrate a complete lack of respect for the legal system. Mansfield was standing now, his face flushed red. Let me tell you what I see, Ms. Lopez. I see someone who thinks the rules don't apply to her. Someone who thinks she can talk her way out of consequences with a bunch of half-baked legal arguments she doesn't even understand. The courtroom had gone deathly silent. Even the court reporter had paused, her hands hovering over the keys. Your Honor, please. Sandra's voice cracked convincingly. Bailiff. Mansfield roared, cutting her off. This defendant is in contempt of court. Take her into custody immediately. The bailiff, a heavy-set man in his 50s, hesitated. Your Honor, she's just asking questions. Did I stutter? I said take her into custody. 30 days for contempt, consecutive to whatever sentence I impose for the underlying violation. The bailiff moved toward Sandra slowly, his hand resting on his handcuffs but not yet removing them. The uncertainty in his movement was palpable. He'd seen Mansfield do this before, but something about this felt different. Sandra raised her hand slightly, palms out, her voice small. "Your Honor, I have a right to ask about my case." "The Constitution." "The Constitution." Mansfield was practically spitting now. "You're going to lecture me about the Constitution? I've been interpreting constitutional law since before you were born. You have no idea what you're talking about, and your continued insolence is going to cost you months of your freedom." He pointed a shaking finger at the bailiff. "Cuff her." "No. I want her processed and in a cell within the hour." The bailiff pulled out his handcuffs, moving toward Sandra with reluctant steps. And that's when everything changed. Sandra straightened her spine. Her shoulders rolled back. The tremor left her voice. "Actually, Your Honor," she said, her tone suddenly sharp as surgical steel, "I know exactly what I'm talking about." The transformation was instant and absolute. Sandra's posture shifted from hunched defeat to predatory confidence. The uncertain drawl vanished from her voice, replaced by the clipped precision of someone who'd argued before appellate courts. "For the record," Sandra continued, her eyes locked on Mansfield, "you've just violated my Sixth Amendment right to counsel in a case where incarceration exceeds 6 months, per Argesinger v. Hamlin. You've denied me access to exculpatory evidence in violation of Brady v. Maryland. You've prevented me from confronting my accuser under the Sixth Amendment's Confrontation Clause. And you've just issued a contempt citation that appears to be retaliatory in nature, which raises serious First Amendment concerns." The courtroom froze. The bailiff's hand stopped mid-reach for Sandra's wrist. Mansfield's face shifted from red to pale. "What did you just—" "I'm not finished, Your Honor." Sandra's voice cut through his like a scalpel. "What you've been doing for the past 20 minutes constitutes a violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, willful deprivation of rights under color of law. That's a federal felony, Judge Mansfield. It carries a maximum sentence of 1 year in federal prison. Or, if bodily injury results from your actions, and I'd argue that wrongful incarceration qualifies, up to 10 years. The blood drained from Mansfield's face completely now. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Who are you?" "Someone who knows the law considerably better than you do." Sandra reached into her bag, the same cheap canvas tote she'd been clutching nervously moments before. Title 18, Section 242 states, and I quote, "Whoever, under color of any law, statute, ordinance, regulation, or custom, willfully subjects any person to the deprivation of any rights, privileges, or immunities secured or protected by the Constitution or laws of the United States shall be fined or imprisoned." She pulled out a small recording device and placed it on the defendant's table with a soft click that echoed through the silent courtroom. "I've been recording this entire proceeding. Every unconstitutional ruling. Every denial of due process. Every moment you've weaponized your position to terrorize defendants who don't know their rights." Sandra's smile was cold. "But I do know my rights, Your Honor. I know them intimately." Mansfield gripped the edge of his bench. "This is— You can't— Recording in my courtroom is prohibited." Actually, Georgia law permits recording of judicial proceedings for purposes of documenting potential misconduct. Smith v. State, 2019. Would you like me to continue citing case law, or would you prefer to sit down and listen very carefully to what happens next? The prosecutor had risen from his seat, his face confused. The bailiff had backed away from Sandra entirely. The court reporter sat motionless, her hands frozen above her machine. Mansfield sank slowly back into his chair, his earlier rage replaced by something that looked dangerously close to fear. "I'd like to call a recess," he said quietly. Sandra shook her head. "Motion denied, Your Honor. We're just getting started." The courtroom doors swung open with a bang that made everyone jump. A woman in a crisp navy suit strode down the center aisle, her heels clicking against the worn linoleum with military precision. She carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a manila envelope in the other. "Your Honor," the woman announced, her voice formal and unwavering, "I'm here to serve legal documents on this court." Mansfield's hands trembled as he gripped his gavel. "This proceeding is not federal injunction, Judge Mansfield. Time sensitive. I'm required by law to deliver it immediately." The woman reached the bench and extended the envelope. When Mansfield didn't take it, she placed it directly on his desk. "You've been served." The bailiff moved toward her, but Sandra raised a hand. "Let her finish." The process server turned to face the gallery, projecting her voice like an actress on opening night. "Let the record show that at 9:47 a.m. on this date, I have served Judge Roy Thomas Mansfield with a federal injunction filed in the Northern District of Georgia, along with a formal complaint to the Georgia Judicial Qualifications Commission." She paused, glancing at Sandra with the slightest hint of a smile. The complaint was filed by attorney Sandra Maria Lopez, senior associate at Brennan and Chase LLP, New York. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Sandra reached into her bag again, this time pulling out a slim leather wallet. She flipped it open to reveal her State Bar of New York card, then a second card, Georgia Bar Association, active status. "I passed the Georgia Bar 3 years ago, Your Honor. I maintain dual licensure specifically for cases like this." Mansfield's face had gone from pale to gray. "This is entrapment. Entrapment requires government inducement to commit a crime you weren't predisposed to commit." Sandra's voice was clinical now, every word a surgical strike. "You've been violating constitutional rights in this courtroom for decades. I didn't make you do anything you weren't already doing to dozens of defendants every single week. I just made sure someone was finally watching who knew what to look for." She walked to the prosecution table and opened her bag fully, pulling out a thick accordion folder. "I have affidavits from 47 former defendants who were denied counsel in cases where jail time was imposed. I have transcripts showing a pattern of Brady violations spanning 6 years. I have financial records suggesting you've been coordinating with the county to maximize fine revenue through unconstitutional sentencing." The prosecutor had gone pale. "Your Honor, I had no knowledge." "Save it," Sandra cut him off. "You're named in the complaint too. Failure to intervene when constitutional violations are occurring in plain sight makes you complicit." She turned back to Mansfield, who looked like he might vomit. "The injunction prohibits you from presiding over any cases pending a full federal investigation. Your authority in this courtroom is suspended, effective immediately." Mansfield found his voice, thin and desperate. "You can't do this. I'm dismissing this case. You no longer have that authority." Sandra placed her Harvard Law School diploma on the table. She'd been carrying it the whole time. "But I do. And I'm not done." Mansfield's hand shot toward his gavel, a desperate reflex of a man who'd wielded power for so long he'd forgotten it could be taken away. "This court is adjourned. Touch that gavel and I'll add obstruction of justice to your charges." Sandra's voice cracked through the courtroom like a whip. "You're not presiding anymore, Judge Mansfield. You're a defendant. Start acting like one." The gavel froze inches from the bench. The courtroom doors opened again. This time, 2 federal agents in dark suits entered, their credentials already visible. Behind them, a woman in her 60s wearing prosecutor's attire walked in with the calm confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. Special Agents Morrison and Chen, FBI, the taller one announced. We're here to execute a federal warrant for the seizure of court records pursuant to an ongoing civil rights investigation. Sandra turned to the woman in prosecutor's attire. Judge Mansfield, allow me to introduce Assistant United States Attorney Rebecca Cross. She'll be handling the federal case against you. I'm just here for the civil complaints and the disbarment proceedings. Mansfield's voice came out as a rasp. You planned this. This entire thing was a setup. No, Your Honor. Sandra's eyes were ice. A setup implies I created a crime that wouldn't have existed otherwise. You committed these violations all by yourself. Every single day. To people who couldn't fight back. She gestured to the gallery, where defendants who'd been waiting for their cases sat frozen in shock. I just made sure that for once, someone was documenting it. The AUSA stepped forward, her heels clicking on the courthouse floor. Judge Mansfield, while you're not under arrest at this moment, I strongly suggest you retain counsel. The federal government will be pursuing charges under Title 18, Section 242, as Ms. Lopez outlined. Additionally, we're investigating potential conspiracy charges related to your coordination with county officials to maximize incarceration rates. This is insane, Mansfield sputtered, finally rising from his bench, though it seemed less like standing and more like collapsing upward. I've served this community for 30 years. You've terrorized this community for 30 years, Sandra corrected. The average sentence you impose for traffic violations is 4 times the state median. Your contempt citations are 8 times higher than any other judge in Georgia. And your courtroom has a conviction rate of 98%. Statistically impossible unless you're systematically denying due process. She pulled one final document from her folder and slid it across the bench. That's a list of every person you've sentenced in the past 5 years who was denied counsel despite facing incarceration. My firm is representing all of them in a class action lawsuit. We're seeking full exoneration, expungement of records, and compensatory damages. Mansfield stared at the document, his hands shaking. You've destroyed me. No, Sandra said quietly. You destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone could finally see it. The bailiff, the same one who'd been ordered to handcuff her minutes ago, stepped forward with his cuffs. But this time, he wasn't looking at Sandra. He was looking at the judge. The bailiff's voice was quiet but firm. Your Honor, I need you to step down from the bench. Mansfield looked at the handcuffs, then at the agents, then back at Sandra. For a moment, it seemed like he might refuse, like 30 years of unchallenged authority might compel him to make one final stand. But whatever fight he'd had left crumbled when he saw the faces in the gallery. The defendants he'd humiliated. The families he'd destroyed. They were all watching him fall. This isn't over, Mansfield said as he descended the steps, his robes dragging behind him like a funeral shroud. You're right, Sandra replied. You still have your criminal trial, your disbarment hearing, and approximately 47 civil lawsuits. So no, Your Honor, this is just beginning. The agents escorted him out through a side door, sparing him the walk of shame through the main corridor. The courtroom sat in stunned silence until the door clicked shut. Then someone started clapping. It was an elderly black woman in the third row, someone Sandra recognized from the case files. Mansfield had sentenced her to 60 days for a broken taillight 2 years ago. She'd lost her job at the hospital. Others joined her. Slowly at first, then building into something thunderous. The applause filled the courtroom like a long-held breath finally released. Sandra gathered her files and walked out through the main doors into the midday sun. The courthouse steps were already crowded with local news crews. Word traveled fast in small towns, and the fall of Judge Mansfield was the kind of story that would dominate headlines for weeks. She stood at the top of the steps, her cheap Goodwill hoodie replaced now by the tailored blazer she'd kept in her car. Behind her, the courthouse that had loomed over Millbrook for generations suddenly seemed smaller, less threatening. Just a building where justice might actually have a chance now. A reporter thrust a microphone toward her. "Ms. Lopez, why did you risk your career to go undercover like this?" Sandra thought about her cousin Maria, about the 63 days Maria had spent in jail for a $20 infraction, about her niece and nephew in foster care. Their lives appended because a judge decided cruelty was easier than compassion. "Because someone had to," Sandra said simply. "And because I could." Another reporter called out, "What's next for you?" Sandra looked down Main Street, at the town that had raised her, and then watched as men like Mansfield tried to break people who looked like her. She thought about the files still in her briefcase. Other judges, other counties, other systems that protected the powerful and crushed the vulnerable. "There are a lot of Judge Mansfields out there," she said. "And I'm just getting started." She walked down the courthouse steps toward her rental car. Behind her, the gathered crowd continued to celebrate. Ahead of her, the work continued. Justice wasn't just about one corrupt judge in one small town. But it was a start. And sometimes that's all you need. If this story of justice and vindication moved you, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button right now, because we're bringing you more real stories of underdogs who refuse to stay down, corrupt systems that finally got exposed, and moments where karma delivered exactly what was deserved. Drop a comment below and tell us. Have you ever witnessed someone in power get what they deserved? Or do you know someone who stood up against a broken system? Your stories matter, and this community wants to hear them. And smash that like button if you believe that no matter how long it takes, justice always finds a way. We've got more incredible true stories coming your way. Stories of people who fought back when everyone said they couldn't win. Subscribe now. You won't want to miss what's coming next.